Welcome back. In the previous video, we learned about Docker volumes. Today, we are taking the next step, exploring Docker Compose. If you have been using Docker, you probably know how we usually run containers one by one with Docker run. But when your application needs multiple containers, like a web app with a database or Nginx working with Redis, running them manually becomes messy really fast. That's exactly where Docker Compose comes in. Think of it like an orchestra conductor. Just like a conductor coordinates multiple instruments to play in harmony, Docker Compose manages multiple containers and makes them work together as one application. Instead of typing separate Docker run commands for each container, we can describe everything in one simple YAML file and bring the entire setup and running with a single command. Before diving into Compose, let's talk about YAML. YAML stands for YAML ain't markup language or yet another markup language. It's just a human-friendly way to define configurations using indentation. Instead of brackets and commas, like JSON, YAML relies on spacing and key value pairs. Docker Compose uses YAML to define services, networks, and volumes. So, let's go hands-on. I am inside Visual Studio Code and I have created a folder called Docker Compose Demo. Inside this folder, I have added a file named Docker Compose YAML. Here's the structure of a Docker Compose file. At the top level, we usually define three things: services, volumes, and networks. Services are your containers. Volumes store your persistent data. Networks connect your services together. Let's see how this looks in practice. This file, Docker Compose YAML, is the heart of Docker Compose. Let's walk through it line by line. At the very top, we have a section called Services. Now remember, every container we want to run with Docker Compose goes inside this section. Think of services as the place where we define each microservice or container. In our case, we are going to run two: a web service and a Redis service. First, let's look at the web service. Here, we give it a name web. Under that, we specify the image we want to use. In this case, Nginx Alpine. That means Docker Compose will pull the lightweight Nginx image from Docker Hub if it's not already available locally. Then we have the ports section. We are saying 8092:80. On the left side, 8092 is the port on my local machine. On the right side, 80 is the port inside the container where Nginx listens. So, when I open my browser and type localhost 8092, the request is forwarded to port 80 of the Nginx container. Next, notice the depends on. We are saying that our web service depends on Redis. This tells Docker Compose, start Redis first, then start the web service. It's like saying, hey conductor, make sure the drums are ready before the guitar starts playing. Now let's look at the Redis service. Same as before. We define its name, Redis. For the image, we are using the official Redis 7 image from Docker Hub. But here's something extra. We add a volumes section. It says Redis data :/data. On the left side is the name of our volume, Redis data. On the right side is a /data, which is the folder inside the Redis container where Redis stores its data. This means even if I stop or remove the Redis container, my data doesn't disappear. It stays safely stored in the Redis data volume. Finally, at the very bottom of the file, we declare the volume itself. Volumes Redis data. This simply tells Docker Compose, create a named volume called Redis data. That's the one we connected earlier to our Redis container. So it's all linked. Redis writes to /data inside the container, which maps to our Redis data volume outside the container. Notice how web and Redis are at the same indentation under services. That's important because YAML uses spaces, not tabs. Every line here is a key followed by a value. For example, image :Nginx Alpine means the key is image and the value is Nginx Alpine. We can see the hierarchy here by collapsing sections. We can expand here. So this is the hierarchy. Let's do quick sanity checks. For that, we use the command docker compose config. Docker compose config validates the YAML and prints the merged configuration. We can see services, Redis, web, networks, volumes. This is great for catching indentation or schema errors before we run anything. So here, if you observe the output, Docker compose config returns no errors. I would like to give some troubleshoot tips here. If it says empty compose file, your file is empty or not saved. If it complains about services, Redis volumes must be an error or similar. In that case, fix indentation and ensure list items use hyphen with a space. Let's do Docker compose up. Let me clear the screen. Docker compose up -d. This reads the YAML, pulls any missing images and starts all services in detached mode. -d means background. You only need one command to start the whole app. So let's observe what happens here. Docker checks images locally, pulls Nginx Alpine and Redis 7 if missing. It creates a project scoped network. It creates the named volume Redis data. It starts containers for Redis and web respecting depends on order. If you observe, web service depends on Redis. So, it started Redis, then web service. Let's check Docker compose PS. The containers are up and running. And we can see here the Nginx. So the container is up and running and listening on port 80 and the host port is 8092. Let's open the browser and check 8092, localhost 8092. So the browser is showing the Nginx default page. Let's check logs. Let me clear the screen. Docker compose logs. We can see the web logs followed by Redis. If we want to check logs for a single service, we can do so by using Docker compose logs and specify the service name. Let's do Redis. So we can see the logs here. Let's quickly check the Docker desktop. We have images, Nginx and Redis. And let's check containers. So we have the compose stack, Docker compose demo, which has both web service and Redis. So both containers are up and running. Let's click on the container. We can see the logs here. And if we click on inspect and check mounts section, so it doesn't have anything. Let's go back. Let's check Redis. We have logs here. If you inspect, check mounts, you can see volume. Type volume, name Docker compose demo, Redis data. Source and the destination /data, the path inside the container. If we check files, you can see volume mounted at /data. Let's check volumes, Redis data. If you click on the volume, it's in use, and the container in use is Docker Compose demo Redis 1. Let's go back. Let me clear the screen. Let's try interacting with a service. For that, we do Docker Compose exec command, execute. Redis, and we use the redis-cli tool, redis-cli, and let's give ping see, we received the output pong. So this Docker Compose exec runs a command inside a running service container by service name. Here we run redis-cli ping and expect pong, and that proves Redis is responsive. Exec requires the container already running and runs the command inside it. Let's try to write a key. Docker Compose exec Redis, give redis-cli, and let's set some greeting. Set greeting hello. It says okay. Let's try reading it. Docker Compose exec redis-cli get greeting. Let's see. It says hello. So we stored a key inside Redis. Let's check whether the data is persistent or not. Now we will stop and recreate containers. Let's do that. Docker Compose ps. Now let's do Docker Compose down. See, this got removed. Let's check Docker Compose ps. Nothing. Now let's do Docker Compose up again. -d in detach mode. Let's check Docker Compose ps. See, the containers are up and running. Now let's try to read it again. Docker Compose exec redis-cli, and let's do get greeting again. We will see what it will print, or it prints or not. So it gave the output hello. So even after we performed Docker Compose down and recreating the stack, the greeting key is still there. That's because we mapped slash data to the named volume redis underscore data. Let me clear the screen. Let's inspect volumes and networks. Docker volume ls. So we have the volume Docker compose demo redis data. Let's inspect this. Docker volume inspect. Let's pass this volume name. So we see the details here, the mount point and the name. We clear the screen. Let's check Docker network. Docker network ls and see the name, the project network, and the name is Docker compose demo default. Let's inspect Docker network inspect and pass this name, the network name. You can see all the details here, name, containers, Docker compose demo web 1 and Docker compose demo redis 1. So this way we can list and inspect volumes and networks. So Compose created a project network for internal service communication and a named volume for Redis storage. Let's check Docker desktop. Let's go to containers. Let's click on any container name, and if we go inspect and check networks, we can see Docker compose demo web 1. Default network Docker compose demo default. This is the default project network for internal service communication. We go here, inspect networks, Docker compose demo default and Docker compose demo redis 1 for redis. Let's inspect images and containers. Let me clear the screen. Docker images and Docker ps-a. So these show the pulled images and all containers. Docker images lists images on disk, and Docker ps-a shows all containers including stopped ones. Let's quickly check the documentation. Click on Docker Compose. So Docker Compose is a tool for defining and running multi-container applications. Compose simplifies the control of your entire application stack in a single YAML configuration file. Let's check this. Why use Compose? Using Docker Compose offers several benefits that streamline the development, deployment, and management of containerized applications. Simplified control. Define and manage multi-container apps in one YAML file. How Compose works? With Docker Compose, you use a YAML configuration file known as compose file. The key commands are docker compose up, docker compose down, docker compose logs, docker compose ps to list all the services. So we used all these commands. Docker compose up -d and docker compose down. So you can explore all YAML options here. Services, volumes, config secrets, networks. Define services in Docker Compose, like services, image, Nginx latest. So we can go through all this documentation and apply the same in our YAML files. So to wrap up, Compose means one YAML file, multiple containers, and easy management. That's it for today's session. We just learned how Docker Compose helps you run multiple containers like Nginx and Redis, all from one simple YAML file. If this tutorial helped you understand Docker Compose, please take a second to like this video, share it, and subscribe it to the channel for more hands-on DevOps and cloud tutorials. Drop your questions or topics you would like me to cover next in the comments. I read every one of them. In the next video, we will explore how to build custom images using Docker Compose and when to use Docker Compose build. Thanks for watching. See you next time.